Hello, my fellow humans, and welcome back to another episode of The Sapien Score. Today, we are going to be taking a look at the 2020 roguelike Hades. If you're unfamiliar with the roguelike genre, essentially, you have one life, and if you die, that's it. Game over. You restart from the beginning and have to keep on progressing until you beat the game in one run. Hades follows this formula. However, there are certain upgrades that you can get which will carry over even after you die and will permanently power up your character. These permanent upgrades can be purchased in between runs using a special currency gotten through the dungeons called Darkness. And if you're like me at all, you'll be dying a lot, so you'll be really grateful once you accrue enough to purchase the next permanent upgrade. The game revolves around playing as Zagreus, the son of Hades, as he tries to escape from the underworld. As you traverse through the different areas, you will be tasked with clearing the rooms of all the enemies. Once you do, a boon will drop, which is a themed upgrade given to you by one of the Greek gods or goddesses. Each of them has their own particular theme for the boons. In the case of Artemis, it's critical hit damage. And once you activate it, you will be given 3 different options for an upgrade path to take. This is generally split between your special, your normal, and your cast attack, but there are also other options and other variables at play that the boons can affect. While boons offer the core and the greatest upgrades to your abilities, there are also other unlockables once you clear dungeons, including the Palms of Power, which upgrade existing boons to a higher level, as well as different types of currency that you can spend once your run is over in the main hub. Additionally, throughout your run, as you kill enemies and also clear certain sub-challenges such as the treasure troves, you'll be awarded gold, which is a currency that only lasts within the given run. So if you don't use it within your run and you die, it all goes away. You don't keep it. You can use the gold at certain stages that happen before and after the boss encounters, as well as the Wells of Charon, to purchase different upgrades. This includes sometimes boons and Palms of Power, but also you can purchase health restores and other additional items. Essentially, the core gameplay loop can be boiled down to enter a stage, clear the enemies, get a power-up, and then move on and rinse and repeat. And while this may sound pretty simple, the brilliance of Hades really lies in the underlying complexity and how the boons and the different upgrades interact with each other, as well as the diversity of different weapon types and the different builds that you can create by utilizing certain boons with certain weapons and the synergies they have. Speaking of weapons, there are 6 in total that Zagreus can equip, including a sword, a spear, a bow, a shield, some good old-fashioned fisticuffs, and a railgun. Each of these 6 weapons has its own unique moveset and playstyle, and in addition to that, each weapon also has 4 different aspects, which are alternate versions of the weapon, which have a different ability that also further changes the playstyle. And on top of all of that, there's also the Daedalus Hammer, an upgrade you can pick up during your run, which further changes the moveset for a given weapon. In my opinion, this huge array of different weapon types, as well as the diversity in the different boons, is what makes Hades such a fun and enjoyable game, as well as lends itself really well to replayability. A lot of the game is just spent trying out new things and finding out which builds you like and which you don't, and what suits your playstyle the best. And although the majority of the time the boons that you will acquire are at the mercy of RNGesus, there are certain unlockables, especially later on in the game, that allow you to re-roll the boons that you're offered and allow a little more customizability in the types of builds that you can create. And finally, on top of all these underlying well-developed mechanics is the actual combat gameplay, which is extremely polished and very crisp. In fact, in comparison to the underlying mechanics, the combat system is fairly simple, only made up of really 4 core attacks: the normal slash, a special, the cast, and then the dash. And although it is simple, Hades really benefits from this type of combat system because it keeps it accessible to everyone and it's very easy to pick up and learn. And since the boons and the underlying interactions between how you stack them and build out your character is much more complex, it is really helpful to have the actual, button presses and actual controls of the game be simple and straightforward. I think that this was a particularly good choice given the diversity in the different weapon types and the variety there. By keeping the combat simple, it allows you to pick up and try all the different types and figure out which ones are your favorite, as opposed to having vastly different movesets and combos that would somewhat punish a player for wanting to try out a new weapon or new build. In totality, these mechanics add up to an extremely well-polished and satisfying gameplay experience, and Hades is simply really addictive and really fun to play. I think part of the magic for Hades, in my opinion, is the fact that although I was dying a lot, it wasn't like a typical game where I'd be getting absolutely tilted. And I won't lie, there are definitely situations where I found myself getting a little too frustrated. But for the most part, I saw dying in Hades as opportunities to try out a new weapon or try out a different build. And also, in between the runs, when you are in kind of the main hub, there's a bunch of different characters to interact with. And this takes me to the final core positive of this game, which is the storyline and the voice acting as a whole. I'm not sure who is in charge of the casting for the voice actors over at Supergiant Studios, but get that guy a raise. Absolutely knocked it out of the park. Top tier all around. I don't think I have a single complaint for the voice acting. It was just so well done. The characters really come alive, and the storyline as well is just really interesting and integrated well with the roguelike genre, because every time after you die, you go back to that main hub world and there's some new, quip from a particular character, and really the storyline is progressed through those little interactions that you get in between the runs, as much as it is during the runs themselves through the dialogue that happens between Zagreus and the different gods and goddesses that grant him the boons. And without spoiling any of the story details, once you beat the core main game, the end game is provided in the form of the Heat contract, which is a series of different difficulty modifiers that you can customize before you begin a run, which will change the movesets of different bosses or increase enemy health pools or make them hit harder or enforce a time limit for certain stages. But essentially, it's just to make the game tough for once you get good, kid. And although the Heat modifiers offer further replayability and content, I will say, in my opinion, this was probably the weakest and my least favorite part of the game. Some of the Heat modifiers were good. I particularly like the ones that add the skills to the boss's moveset, but I felt that a lot of them were just kind of cheesy and kind of cheap in my opinion. The worst of which definitely being the time limit one. Although it's not bad for the most part, there's one particular level that you have to clear to beat the game, and essentially it just boils down to sheer luck of finding this item. You have to choose like one of 5 different paths, and if you don't pick the right one, you will run out of time no matter what. And it's all down to luck. And I think that is just particularly stupid. I think that the timer, it would have been an easy fix. All they need to do is just pause the timer at that stage, because otherwise you still have to rush through the other stages. But essentially your entire run will come down to making a guess on this particular part. And although I understand that a lot of this game falls upon RNG, like which boons you get, how powerful you get, and it's a lot of just luck, I think that this one particular element of the game is just broken. However, to be completely fair, this is part of those optional difficulty modifiers, so it is completely avoidable. But it really got on my nerves personally. My final nitpick of the game is that, especially later on after you've cleared it a couple of times, some of the runs can start to blend together and feel a bit similar just due to the nature that you progress through the same stages and face the same bosses each time. And although this is remedied by the various different weapon types as well as some of the heat modifiers which change around enemy movesets, I will say that there were certain encounters that I felt got repetitive and turned into a grind rather quickly. All in all, however, these are just a couple of small negatives in a game that is otherwise extremely well polished. I definitely have high praise for the graphics, the score and soundtrack, the voice acting, as well as the underlying mechanics and combat system. So overall, if you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan of this game, and I think it's really accessible and is a member of the roguelike genre that I think most people will find easy to jump into. With all that being said, I'm going to give Hades a Sapien score of 9 bananas. Anyways, that's about it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Adios, amigos.